This is going to be the ultimate drifter guide for what is the strongest survivor in Risk of Rain 2. I don't say this with hyperbole either. By the end of this video, you will understand that she is the strongest survivor in Risk of Rain 2 and will break this game. I'll be going over each of her abilities in as much depth as possible, her general playstyle, her best loadout, and some items that you're going to want when you're playing drifter. And when you have the proper context for her, I'll drop the real bombshells. Anyway, here's the Alloy Collective DLC's drifter character guide. Starting off with her passive that not very many people know about. It's called Trash to Treasure, and with each stack of scrap, she gains stackable buffs. White scrap gives her 6% movement speed per stack. Green scrap gives her 3 HP per second. Regenerating scrap actually counts for this. Red scrap gives you 30% attack speed, and yellow scrap, the boss scrap, gives you 15% skill cooldown, which is almost the same amount as an alien head. Don't get junk and scrap confused like I did initially. A simple thing to keep in mind is that drifter's junk can't be buffed. Her primary, Blunt Force, with a 1.0 proc coefficient, deals 170% damage, with a third hit does 350% damage and stuns enemies. Each attack has a 40% chance to spawn junk. Her junk is her main resource of using her other abilities. This is a good primary, but not enough to proc Ronalds and Kajaros even on the third hit, so this is something to keep in mind. As for her secondary, we have two options here. We have Cleanup or Junk Cube. Cleanup tosses a volley of debris for 4 times 100% damage, as well as a random projectile in your bag, and you can consume 2 junk to bypass the cooldown to immediately use it again. You can tell what her next volley is going to throw out with it because it'll be sticking out of her bag. A full list is on the screen, but there are common, uncommon, and legendary random projectiles. For example, a sticky bomb is common, but you can also shoot out a broken handy head as a legendary. See, everyone who wanted handy? He's an Alloyed Collective. Don't be upset now. And now we have the infamous Junk Cube, an 8-second cooldown with a 1.0 proc coefficient. You slam down a Junk Cube for 400% damage, and hitting this will impact enemies for 400% damage up to 3 times before exploding for 800% damage. This costs 4 junk to bypass the cooldown. Junk Cube has so many different techs that I'm probably not even going to be able to list all of them, but one of the most important things to do is stand on top of your Junk Cube and aim upwards at aerial enemies. This is what I assume it must be like to fly on Frontier. This is probably going to be your main way of dealing with aerial enemies, especially early on in the game as Drifter. Just pray to God you don't end up seeing a Zai construct. Also, a big thing to note about the Junk Cube is that you can only have 4 out at once. Damn you, Gearbox. September was going to be interesting next year. Putting down a 5th is just going to explode the oldest one. And 2 very important things to note when you're using Junk Cube. 1, if you have your Repossess skill, her utility skill, you can use that to smack the Junk Cube and get free scrap essentially, converting raw matter and hobo energy into temporary items. This will be important for later, so keep this in mind. And then finally, for some of you Eclipse 8 players out there who take fall damage, if you use Junk Cube, it will reset your velocity and allow you to avoid fall damage. Pretty nifty trick if you fall off like me. Please like this video. Moving on to her utility abilities. That's bars, Dr. Seuss. We have Repossess with a 7-second cooldown and the ability with the most shenanigans available to it. You can grab monsters, interactables, or friends. Typically in your average game, you're going to be using this to pick up enemies, beat the living crap out of them for extra junk, and toss the Halcyonite off the stage. For those of us who got extra credit on our sociopathy test, you can also chuck 3D printers, scrappers, large chests, your friends, and quite possibly your friendship right off a ledge too. Or, God forbid, there's not a ledge for you to throw stuff off of, you could simply break that 3D printer right in front of your friend's eyes. Trolling aside, the Repossess ability also has an effect called Bludgeon, which is where you do 280% damage per smack on the ground, dropping at least 1 junk, and if you kill the enemy inside or object, you gain extra junk. Bagged bodies, aka your friend or a monster, will escape after 3 slams, but interactables can be held for as long as you want. Keep in mind there are some enemies that will just bust out immediately. Children love busting out of the sack. I know from personal experience, it's much better to just beat them to death. You can also use this to avoid fall damage, and if you throw certain types of enemies at other enemies, it can sometimes do a specific debuff to them. For example, throwing a wisp at enemies will light them on fire. Throwing your friend off a cliff will light your friendship on fire. Lots of different effects to consider. Her other alternate utility is Tornado Slam, and since it's already past Halloween and nobody gives a shit about Beyblades, I would almost skip this ability entirely. You do a spinning attack for 170% damage, and then you can cancel it or let it expire itself for 400% damage. You can ricochet off heavier enemies, so example, Stone Golem, allowing you to bounce like a little pinball. It does move you forward a little bit, so you could use it kind of for mobility. But honestly, anyone who's trying to cope and say Tornado Slam is a good ability, cease. Stop. This is Coughing Baby versus Atomic Bomb energy. Finally, let's talk about her special. She can either use Salvage or she can use Tinker. One of these is not like the other. You'll see in a second. Starting out with Salvage, consume 8 junk to spawn 4 temporary items. 8 junk is basically 3/4 of her junk bar, and the cooldown is 30 seconds. Now for temporary items, those last for 80 seconds for their base value. However, each one has its own independent timer. So for example, if you picked up an armor-piercing round, that temporary item would last for 80 seconds. If you picked up another one, that one would last for 80 seconds as well. But the timer for the second one doesn't start until the first one expires. So if you picked up both at the same time, it would be 80 seconds with 2 armor-piercing rounds, and then another 80 seconds with 1 armor-piercing rounds. Also, there are several items that can't be temporary items, for example, Sail Star, Regenerating Scrap, and Prayer Beads. However, certain items like Sonor's Whispers and Rusted Key can be temporary items, and when they drop items, they will be permanent. So for example, if a Sonor's Whispers drops a armor-piercing rounds from a boss, that armor-piercing rounds will be permanent. And in the case of Rusted Keys, you will be using your temporary items before you use your permanent ones. So it's a cute way to make sure that you can always have a Rusted Key with you on every stage. As for Void items, as I know most of you are probably wondering right now, yes, Void items can be temporary if a temporary item is converted into a Void item. For example, a temporary ATG being corrupted into a Plasma Shrimp will then become a temporary Plasma Shrimp. And I think that explains temporary items for the most part. Also, one thing to be aware of, if you leave temporary items on the ground, they don't actually have a timer or despawn, whether from Drifter Salvage or Junk Drones, so you can leave them on the floor for as long as you want, and this will be a key component of why Drifter is the strongest survivor. I'll explain more in a few. Now, moving on to her alternate special, the one that's been getting a lot of talk, Tinker. A similar 30-second cooldown. It has a 1.0 proc coefficient, and it's a shockwave that does 100% damage and stuns enemies that go through it. It costs 8 junk as well. However, the special ability that makes it good for macro gods is that it will tinker with items, multi-shops, halcyon fragments, void potentials, and do something special depending on what it is. For multi-shops and 3D printers, it will re-roll them up to 2 times, meaning that if you don't see anything in a multi-shop you like, or you don't see anything in a 3D printer that you like, you have the option to try again with Tinker. For items that are on the ground, Tinker will instead make a temporary version of that item, and then give you a scrap of a corresponding rarity. So a white item will give you white scrap. Also, this Tinker ability works on multi-shop terminals, 3D printers, cauldrons, and even Aurelionite fragments. It works on a lot of stuff. Tinker is even better than it seems because of how it works with her passive, and also how scrappers work in general. Scrappers aren't precise, and they will take up to 10 of whatever item you want to scrap. So let's say, for example, you wanted to keep some of your cautious slugs, but you had 5. You want to keep like 1 or 2 because it's good regen, but if you use a scrapper, it's going to take all 5 of your cautious slugs. You don't have a choice to keep 1 or 2. However, with Tinker, now you don't have to worry about that. So not only can this help when you don't find scrappers when you need them, but it also helps more precisely craft your build. Now, for the real macro pillars out there, here's what you really want to do with Tinker. Instead of going individually to every multi-shop, every 3D printer, and every item on the floor, you can use Drifter's Sack to minimize how much of her junk you're going to have to use. By simply putting all the 3D printers and multi-shops together, at least the ones that you want to reroll, with a single use of Tinker, you could reroll the whole map. You just have to do Extreme Home Makeover on the stage. This is a macro player's aphrodisiac. I don't expect Race to play any other survivor than this one for possibly the rest of his days, unless he's forced to. However, surprisingly, this isn't the broken thing I was talking about. More on that in a second. First, let me tell you what I think her best loadout might be versus the loadout that I'm going to be running. I think, gun to my head, the best loadout is going to be using Tinker as her special, Repossess as her utility, and Junk Cube as her secondary. For people who want to min-max the game, this seems like the best version of Drifter. For me, personally, for the whimsy and fun, I'm going to be definitely running Salvage because I love temporary items. I'm going to be running Repossess because, well, Tornado Slam. What? And then I'm going to be running Cleanup because I'm a contrarian and too many people told me Junk Cube is better, so now I have to go the opposite direction. A real country bear doesn't use Junk Cube. Okay, I might, but I'm not going to admit it here. Now, as for the items that are going to be really good on Drifter, I'm going to go ahead and avoid going all over the common items that everyone's going to run. Oh wow, Lensmaker's Glasses and ATG's good on a Survivor? No way! Instead, we're going to be looking at items like Substandard Duplicator, which actually came with the Alloy Collective DLC, and picking up an item gives you a temporary copy of itself. Temporary items last an additional 10 seconds plus 10 per stack seconds. So sadly, the stacking isn't the greatest. It doesn't give you an extra item each time you stack it, but just a single substandard duplicator turns your 4 items from your salvage ability into 8, with a longer cooldown as well. In a similar vein, Bandolier or even a Lysate Cell is going to help you a lot when you spawn more items with salvage, or they can help you with Tinker. Another Alloy DLC item, Collector's Compulsion, also works well with Drifter. Picking up an item or other collectible increases all stats by 3% for 20 seconds, up to 3 plus 2 per stack times. So with all those temporary items items you're dropping, you're going to be able to stack Collector's Compulsion a lot. I would also say don't sleep on the Shuriken item from Survivors of the Void DLC. There are very few ways for Drifter to be able to deal with enemies in the air, so Shurikens is nice to have, especially as a backup. Xi Constructs haunt my dreams. Barrier is also going to be very good for Drifter, basically in any form. Aegis, for example, just recently got buffed. Not necessarily Aegis, but Barrier itself. Barrier decays slower at lower stacks, which helps Aegis a lot. And Barrier is based off of your max HP from both shield and HP. And guess what? This hobo is tanky. All right, now for the mind-boggling big drop moment. Vine boom sound effect here. The reason why Drifter is probably the best survivor in the game is her infinite item gimmick. Combining everything we know about Drifter now with Junk Cube and Repossess, her sack, you can get infinite junk. Using infinite junk, you can spawn infinite temp items. Temporary items are infinite if you keep them on the ground. They will last there until your game crashes. Trust me, I experienced this. This means you could be a very naughty person and just spawn a million temporary items before you fight whatever boss you're about to fight. Mithrix, Soulless Wing, False Sun. Soulless Wing and False Sun both having time frozen when you're fighting them. So really, the game doesn't even get harder if you just sit there for 4 hours doing this. Mithrix is going to scale with time, but that's not going to matter to you, you little homeless scavenger you. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not that strong. However, what you don't know is there are certain parts of each map where things just don't spawn, and things will not spawn. So if you manage to get yourself in a situation like that, and you want to, for example, let's say, go to stage 1 and sit in a location where nothing's going to spawn, you put your tinfoil hat on, and now the NSA can't see you playing with your junk. Well, you can just sit in that location and spawn temporary items until the cows come home, and there is literally nothing anybody can do to stop you. And if you listen to how I explained the temporary items earlier, you also know that although you have 80 seconds before a temporary item expires, it only removes one of the temporary items from the stack, and then there's another 80 seconds before it removes one more. So realistically, you could have these temporary items for the rest of the run, or at least until you get enough permanent items that you can get back on your feet, maybe not be homeless anymore. That part's optional, but no matter what Mithrix says, you never have to be without your trinkets and baubles. Yeah, S tier survivor Drifter, that's the Drifter guide for the Alloyed Collective. If you learned something or enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, and see you next time. Twitch TV/rndThursday, swagmoney69, signing out.